And at this time, I would like to turn today's program over to Coley Boone. Coley, the floor is yours.
Thank you for participating in our webinar titled Keeping Up with Housekeeping. The purpose is to learn about developing good safety housekeeping and accident prevention practices. We plan at the end of the webinar to answer some questions from our audience, so if you have questions during the session, please type it in your chat box and send them to us. Housekeeping is the way in which you maintain the areas in and around your workplace. Every workplace contains both obvious and hidden hazards. Cluttered work areas, hazardous chemicals, and a lack of focus can all create an unsafe work environment and can lead to lost production, painful injuries, and even death. Taking some time to think safety and clean up your workplace can make the difference between a safe and productive day and one you'd rather forget. Good safety housekeeping can significantly reduce accidents and injuries in any type of work environment. By developing good safety habits and by being aware of their work environment and any hazards associated with it, employees can help to create a much safer workplace. Often, even though we are aware that we should be doing things as safely as possible, safety takes a backseat to other considerations as we hurry to complete our day's work. Yet safety is just as important as quality and productivity. Each year, accidents cause millions of people to suffer painful injuries and result in over $1 billion worth of damage. In fact, in this country, someone suffers an accidental injury every 4 seconds. All told, accidents cost almost $90 billion a year in medical bills, lost wages, and lost production time. These injuries and costs are not something that is just happening to the other guy. We experience all of these problems in our workplaces just like everyone else. And every accident, whether it's small or large, affects us adversely in some way, causing us to take time out to clean up, scrap work we have done, shut down an operation, or even do without one of our coworkers while they are recovering from an injury. And remember, accidents can affect every aspect of our personal lives as well. The injuries resulting from accidents we have at work don't stay there when you leave. They can cause you to have to give up many of the activities you enjoy, to make life uncomfortable for others if you cannot do your fair share at home, and make even routine activities difficult and painful. Poor housekeeping can also become costly even if your company maintains a clear claims history. OSHA fines are hefty when it comes to unsafe work environment. Also, you can lose a potential customer if your workplace appears cluttered or unorganized. Next, we have Jim Halford, our Vice President of Loss Control.
Thanks, Coley, and welcome to the AutoComp webinar. We are talking about housekeeping. Housekeeping often doesn't get a lot of attention, but Coley was spot on about the numbers. $90 billion, that's a lot of money in claims. Studies have shown that slightly over a third of all accidents can be attributed to poor housekeeping. You hear a lot about slips, trips, falls. What did they slip on? What did they trip on? You know, poor housekeeping leaves something in the way that they could trip on. So that's how they attribute those kind of accidents to housekeeping. Wouldn't it be great to eliminate 1/3 of all the accidents out there? Housekeeping is really simple. It's just kind of keeping your area clean, picking up after yourself. And most of the time, it's absolutely free. Let's take a look at what we talk about when we're talking about housekeeping. When I drive up to one of our insureds or one of our customers, the first thing I notice is, how does it look out here? Is the grass kept? Landscaping look good? How about the parking lot? Does it have a lot of holes? Is there trash everywhere? Most of the time, the majority of the time, what I see outside is what I can expect to see inside. I start in the parking lot. That's where I usually am. I look at the lot. You know, is it a nice parking lot? Does it need repair? Does it have holes in it? Is the lighting adequate? Can you see your way to and from your car in the dark? I look at parking curbs. One of our biggest accidents last year, most expensive, was simply an employee tripping over a parking curb after they parked their car in front of it. I look for visibility. I look to see if everything's painted in OSHA yellow or a color that would attract my attention to a high step or to a curve or a crack in the walking surface. And I look for holes. Folks, it's an awful lot cheaper to take a bucket of sand and fill a hole than it is to fix a broken ankle. We go from the parking lot into the entrance. There's nothing like coming in off a wet sidewalk onto a sleek linoleum floor for wrenching backs, falling down, twisting knees. Ask me how I know about this. Happened to me about 2 months ago. And when I got inside, I said, hey, why don't you guys have a rubber mat here? The answer was because it's too expensive. Can you imagine what the cost of a broken back would be? Let's get some rubber mats. Let's put them at the entranceways where people can come in and not slip down. And when it's not raining, it's a great way to wipe your shoes off so you don't carry contaminants in onto the floors. How about telling me what I'm in for? Warn me. Give me some signage. Put a sign up that says, you know, the floor is slippery when it's wet. You might think people don't need to be reminded of that, but they really do. It's always a good idea to have signage. Once we leave the entranceway and we get into the plant, the factory, the workplace, keeping the aisles clear is really, really critical, especially in congested work areas. A lot of us are really stretched out as far as space available to store things, so we tend to let them slip over into the aisles. Well, the aisles are, those are travel lanes for pedestrians. They're also travel lanes for powered industrial equipment like forklifts, tugs, and pallet jacks. We need to keep these clear at all times. This is where you'll find your trip hazards. Trip hazards can be extension cords that are stretched across the aisle, running, you know, a box fan or a trouble light. They can be totes. They can be pallets that project out into the aisle, tools, air hoses. Anything that's blocking the walking surface is a slip, trip, or fall hazard, and that's where most of your housekeeping injuries come from. So let's pay particular attention to this area. Continuing to speak about the floors, let's keep them dry. If you see a wet area, wipe it up. If you have a forklift leaking oil, put some oil dry on it. And by all means, get some maintenance done on that forklift so it doesn't drip oil in other places. Make sure that the areas for people walking, pedestrian traffic, and vehicle traffic are clearly separated and are marked. Yellow lines do a great job of delineating these passageways. Let's talk about exits. Exits should never, ever be blocked. They should always be unobstructed access to an exit. The 3 feet area on each side of an exit door must be clear. An exit can never lead to a dead-end hallway. Exit signs are required to be lighted over the doors, or they can be the new type that glow in the dark. And when we're putting these exit signs up, the old hands know where all the doors are. The workers who've been there a long time, they have their own way of coming and going. They're quite comfortable with it and accustomed to it. But let's think about the new guy. He's only been there, he or she, 2-3 weeks. They're so absorbed in trying to learn their job, they're lost. They don't know where the exits are. So let's make sure that anywhere they are standing in your work area, they have but to look up and they can find either an exit sign or a sign out in the middle of the plant up in the roof saying exit with an arrow that directs them in the direction they need to go. Emergency evacuation plan. This is a real big item on OSHA's checklist. It comes under the new GHS system, which used to be Hazard Communications, but it works into housekeeping. One of the things that you need to do in an emergency evacuation plan is train. You can't do enough training. This is an excellent chart in that it shows you on this particular slide, first floor, but it also gives you the evacuation procedures. It tells you what the icons are used for in the legend. Tells you how to use a fire extinguisher and lists the emergency numbers that you could use to call. This is a very good chart to put in a break room and along the walls in your workplace in conspicuous places. When you train, the things that you should stress are gathering points, safe areas that your people can go to immediately after evacuation. When they reach that area, they need to be trained that they're responsible for one person, two people, three people. You can use a chain, an employee chain, or have a simple roll sheet where everyone is reported to the supervisor, roll is called, so you'll know if you have anyone still stuck in a plant. OSHA regulations require there be two separate sounds, one for fire, one for weather hazards. They don't have to be electrically generated. They can be the intercom system that you have in your workplace. I wouldn't recommend the intercom system to warn of fire for the simple reason the fire may have already burned your electrical lines, but certainly have two distinct sounds and make sure the employees have been trained to recognize which is fire and which is weather. When you think you've got your emergency evacuation plan down pat, everybody's been trained, everyone knows what to do, they've sat through the classes, it all looks good on paper, go practice it. Have a drill, have a fire drill, have a tornado drill. You will quickly discover your weak areas. Just when you think everyone's got it, knows exactly what to do, this is a great way to find out they don't. So if you keep drilling at least 2 times a year, your chances of having a very smooth evacuation increase dramatically. We're going to talk now about some things found inside the plant. Most every workplace has a storage area or a warehouse, if you will. Inside there, you'll normally find storage racks. Special interest item with OSHA right now, storage racks. What they come in and look for, they look to see that the weight capacity is listed on each shelf of each rack. Has to be marked with the load-bearing limit. The manufacturer supplied that to you when you bought the racks. They also look to see if the feet of the rack is anchored. Those 4 holes usually found in the feet of the rack, that's where you drill the hole down into the concrete, put the lead anchor, and then bolt it down so that the rack cannot fall over. The height limit. This is where a lot of common sense comes into play. You need to stack at such a height that retrieval by forklift or scissor lift or lull is very easy. If you've got things stacked so high that you reach the absolute limit of your forklift, you need to understand that machines operating at their extreme limits are at their weakest points there. And if it fails, that's where it usually will fail. So try to keep things stacked below that extreme limit of the equipment that you're using. And keep the heavy things on the bottom. That will reduce the likelihood that the rack will become overbalanced and fall. Also, let's think of that new worker again. If you've got pallets and boxes and production boxes stacked so high that it blocks all of the exits, the new employee can't find the exit. Remember that. This is an excellent time to go stick an exit sign up in the middle of your workspace, hanging down from the ceiling, pointing toward the nearest exit. Organization is the key in storage racks. If you keep them organized, keep them anchored, keep the weight on the bottom, you should have no problems. Let's talk about fire extinguishers. The first thing we have to ask about fire extinguishers is, well, what is it for? Very few places that I visit, other than paper mills and huge industrial complexes like that, have a fire brigade. Fire brigades are people who've been trained to fight fire. Usually your employees have not been. So the fire extinguisher takes on a slightly different role. In your fire training, you should state that fire extinguishers are to be used to put out only fires at the incipient stage. That bucket of oily rags that just caught fire, great thing to do is put it out with a fire extinguisher. Then make sure you have that extinguisher replaced. Otherwise, in case of a fire, you're not there to fight the fire. You're there to survive. Grab a fire extinguisher on your way to the exit. If the exit is blocked with fire, use the fire extinguisher to put it out. Throw the fire extinguisher down and get out of the building. They can also be used to break windows and cave-in sheetrock to make a way to get out. But remember, your objective is to get out of the building, not to fight the fire. If you do need to use the fire extinguisher, a great resource that's absolutely free in most cases is your local fire department. They'll be glad to come out and train your people with your fire extinguisher on how to use it. They will use the pass method, which is pull the pin, aim the nozzle, squeeze the trigger, and sweep the fire at its base, and that will extinguish the fire. And you ask, what kind of fire extinguisher do I need? Well, talk to the fire people, and together you can decide if your biggest exposure is electrical fire, then you need a fire extinguisher built to deal with that. If it's gasoline fires, then naturally you need a fire extinguisher that will deal with that. A lot of people think that once I have the fire extinguisher hung by the company that provides them, and that company has punched the holes in there that say, for instance, September 2015, no one needs to look at the fire extinguisher until September 2016. Well, that's not correct. There's a little cardboard card that comes on the fire extinguisher. Flip it onto its reverse side. You will notice there are 12 squares. That correlates roughly with our calendar, which has 12 months. A designated individual every month should go by, check the fire extinguisher, look at the dial, make sure it's still charged, turn it upside down 2 or 3 times to stir up any sediment that might have settled into the bottom, and look up into the hose to see if anyone has played a practical joke that could be deadly by balling up a piece of paper and obstructing the hose, or perhaps a dirt dauber or other insect has built a home there. Make sure that nozzle is clear. And signage. If there's a sign that says fire extinguisher, then there needs to be a fire extinguisher hung under that sign. But it must be off the floor. Fire extinguishers should never be left on the floor. They can be knocked over. If they rest on their side too long, they will discharge in some cases. And they're very easy for somebody to walk by and grab a fire extinguisher and move it, take it to another place and not tell anyone. So the one that used to be on the floor in the corner is no longer there. So make sure all of your fire extinguishers are always hung. We're going from a small cylinder fire extinguisher now to talk about some compressed air cylinders, compressed gas cylinders. Usually think of these as oxygen, acetylene, some inert gases like argon. These are all stored in compressed gas cylinders. They're the ones that the gas company delivers to you on the truck. There are regulations for storing these. If you use them daily, such as an acetylene torch cutting operation or a propane cutting operation, they can be stored on their cart. If you do not use them daily, they must be stored separately and chained to a wall or otherwise restricted from falling. Straps are fine to use. There must be 20 feet of separation between the compressed oxygen and the acetylene. An exception to this would be if you have a compressed gas cylinder cage or storage rack. They'll have a chain to keep them from falling out, but it can also have a firewall that is at least 5 feet tall, a divider, if you will, between the oxygen and the acetylene. It must be capable of withstanding a fire for 30 minutes. A half-inch sheet of drywall, quarter-inch sheet of sheet metal will be sufficient. No smoking signs should always be placed in the immediate area where compressed gas cylinders are stored and or used. Order a bunch of no smoking signs. They come in handy all throughout your work area, but they are required to be posted. The caps that come on the compressed gas cylinders, they remind some folks of bottlenose dolphins. They screw down onto the valve and are there to protect that valve. They should always be in place. If the gas company tries to deliver a bottle to you and it does not have a cap, refuse to accept that bottle until they put a cap on it. There are holes in the side of that cap. Those are the only times it's acceptable to lift that bottle with a strap or chain is when you use the holes on the cap. You can't tie the chain or the strap around the bottle. So always insist that the cap that comes with the bottle stays with the bottle. We've talked about housekeeping, and Coley spoke earlier about some dollar amounts that are attributed to housekeeping losses, and I've talked about, we could reduce that by a third in the real world. One of our other loss consultants, Scott Hunter, is going to talk to you now about some real-world accidents that have happened and real dollars that were spent. And I'm going to turn this over to Scott.
We've heard some really good information and tips on methods to reduce or prevent exposures related to housekeeping. Let's talk about some of the things that occur when we do have an injury. One of the ones that comes to mind that we found in our claims file is a claim related to a slip in a restroom where there was a wet floor. The employee had a pretty significant left knee injury. Total incurred cost of the claim was around $57,500. This is also a litigated file or a lawsuit file. A couple of questions come to mind. Was that the first employee that came across this wet spot in the floor? Did another employee come across this and just assume, well, that's not my job, somebody's going to come along a little bit later and they're going to clean this wet spot up? Which comes to another point that it's important to relay to all employees that safety is not just one person's job. Cleaning up a spill in the floor or removing items that cause trip, slip, fall hazards, that's not one particular person's job. It's every employee's job to make sure that these items are attended to as they see them. Also, when we think about this, this is a $57,500 claim generated by a puddle of water in the floor. But that $57,500, that's just the cost of the claim. That's what it costs to get this person back to maximum medical improvement. Whatever costs were associated with medical treatment, his or her time away from work. But there's some other costs that are associated there that you don't see when you just look at this $57,500 claim cost. There's hidden costs, which can be anticipated to be 3 to 4 times the cost of the injury. You've got lost production. You've got an employee who was probably laying on the floor injured, and other people come over to see what was going on. There's paperwork that supervisors or managers are going to have to fill out to get the claims process started. You're going to have time associated with either retraining or replacing this employee for whatever period of time they're out of work. And then on top of all this, you've got a possible increase in premium because you're going to have a couple of different insurance policies that probably have taken effect at this point, one being workers' comp. And then when there's lawsuit filed, there's also your general liability policy that gets thrown in there. So you've got some scenarios for a couple of different increases in premium. The second one that we're going to look at in the real-life losses is an employee was sitting in a storage room where the company had extra chairs that were stored to get off the floor. This employee sits down, sits beneath the rack, and a chair falls from the top shelf, striking the employee in the head. This was about a $2,200 claim. Again, you look back and you ask why are employees seated, whether it be break or whatever the employee was doing in an area where there's chairs that are overhead? Why would they be sitting beneath those? What are the procedures for making sure that we take these items and we store them properly, that they're properly secured? And then again, this was a $2,200 injury, but when we factor in some of those hidden costs, that injury could easily go $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 when we factor in the hidden cost. What are the next steps? Well, we assign responsibility. We want to make sure that the employees aren't overlooking these things, like puddles of water in the floor or items that are improperly stored. We communicate that it's everybody's responsibility, and we can delegate some of those responsibilities out. Who's responsible for checking break areas? Who's responsible for checking storage areas and checking off either a daily checklist or a weekly checklist? We want to do a daily checklist of our work areas. We want to make sure that we do an inspection, make sure tools, debris, air hoses, extension cords, all of those things are out of aisleways. We want to make sure that any machine guarding or anything else, any other safety features in our work area are properly functioning before we get started with whatever our task is for that day. And then somebody needs to do some type of a monthly checklist where we do a large sweep of whatever our production floor, office facility, make sure that fire extinguishers have been inspected, make sure that our exit routes are not blocked, just kind of an all-encompassing monthly inspection. And then conduct safety meetings. Training is a great way to communicate some of these items to our employees so that they know what they're looking for. It's a good idea to take photographs when we spot these hazards, and then we can use those for our monthly safety meeting. A couple of things to leave you with as we wrap up our housekeeping webinar. You want to stress to your employees, everybody out there, make it your mission to not live with an unsafe condition. Communicate to your employees to police one another. If you see somebody that's leaving an unsafe condition or performing an unsafe act, speak up and don't just ignore it. Make sure that we do those daily checklists of our work areas. Clutter is a breeding ground for accidents and injuries, air hoses, extension cords, trash or debris that's not swept up and put in the garbage daily, tools that are left out. Have our employees, we stress those employees that we want them to turn their attention to accident prevention and housekeeping that you skip may be up all our slip. Now we're entering the question and answer portion of this webinar. Keep in mind that questions need to be submitted through the chat box. If your question is not answered during this session on the webinar, we are going to be sending out email responses to all inquiries that come in through the chat boxes.
And as a reminder, you may ask a question through your web console. Locate the Q&A panel on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Type in your question and click Send to Submit. And I'm showing we do have one question in the Q&A panel. Kelly, would you like for me to read the questions, or will you?
This is going to be on the web.
Good morning. We have a question. How do you incentivize people to keep their areas clean? Employees will buy whatever management is selling. And if every day you go in there and talk about housekeeping and keeping your areas clean, and you assign someone to be responsible for a particular area and a particular task, it'll go a long way. I've always found that if you just say, hey, you guys, you need to be keeping your areas clean, that doesn't do nearly as much good as if you say, John, You're the supervisor here. I'm going to depend on you to make sure these areas are clean, and if they're not, it's on you, my friend. So I think assigning specific responsibilities is the best way to incentivize that. That's a good word. You know, I never heard that one before.
Yeah, for those of you that are asking about printouts from today's presentation or may have came in late, we'll be able to send the PowerPoints out to you so that you'll be able to view that.
And then the link will be on the website.
There's also going to be a link on the website where you'll be able to access the webinar in its entirety.
If there's any more questions, if not, then you can kind of sign off, finish everything.
Are there any other questions? You know, at the end of the seminar, there's a survey there that has about 5 questions that we would appreciate if you would answer. It means a lot to us, and it'll help us make the next seminar better. We really appreciate your attendance today and your support of the webinar program. Don't let it end there. If there is a burning issue with you, if you can think of a subject that would make a good webinar for us to present that would help you do your job better and keep your employees safe, please send us an email or give us a call and let us know what it is. If there aren't any other questions, then I'll bid you a good day.
Thank you again for joining us today. This concludes today's web conference. You may now disconnect.